Hi, this is Jim Lyon, the host of the All That to Say podcast. Before you dive in today, be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can catch all of our fearless conversations. Do you always start with the Bible? Does the BibleProject, and you're working on a project, by that I mean a particular video, let's say, does it always start with the Bible? Okay, this is a preacher guy talking. I can exegete a text, or I can have a skateboard and think, what can this teach me about life? And then I'll find a Bible verse to support my skateboard. Do you ever work both ways, or is it always just something that's springing up out of the Scripture itself? How would you describe that process?
Yeah, well, we are definitely shooting for the second option. If you want to introduce somebody to the Bible on its own terms, it's not going to help to start with skateboarding.
Something externally. That's right.
Yeah.
It seems
maybe
obvious,
a point
but
of reference. Yeah.
I'm just saying, there's a lot of preaching going on that way.
And nothing against using skateboard explanations. I did it for years as a pastor. But educationally, it's about what the biblical authors have their own agenda and their own goals and things that they want to communicate. And they do it through design and repetition over long stretches of this literature on throughout. And so you can use many different metaphors, but a really helpful one is like listening to a long form symphony that happens in many movements with lots of instruments. And so there'll be certain, or think of a movie score, like the musical score for a movie. When a certain character has a set of notes associated with them whenever they show up on the screen, then all it takes, like 1 hour into the movie, is just a few little notes, because you've heard it 10 times by now, and when you see that person. And so that stuff is happening in biblical literature all the time, where you're in a book and something introduced earlier in Genesis gets brought out, and the vocabulary is brought up from earlier. And so what we want to do is help people know how that works. What are the key repeated ideas that the biblical authors care about? And sometimes there are words that are familiar from our religious traditions: salvation, righteousness, faith, and trust. But sometimes the core images or words are not ones that are emphasized in our traditions. And whether that's like tree of life, or covenants. Well, covenants, maybe that depends on where your
where
tradition.
you're coming from.
Your background, exile, knowledge of good and bad, sibling rivalry, election or chosenness. So the biblical authors have their own agenda. And so what we're trying to do is create the content that will set people up to actually track with the actual Bible as you read it, as opposed to kind of a grid that we are making the Bible fit into. So we don't do it perfectly. But for me, part of the joy of my education was learning from the whole of the Christian and Jewish tradition, learning ancient culture, ancient languages, to help check my own biases and prejudices at the door, hopefully, at least more than if I didn't use those tools. And so the goal is to just hear the Bible on its own terms, and that's kind of informs all the content that we make.